You think you know yourself, don't you? You believe that the person you present to the world, the carefully curated version of your desires, your attractions, your sexual self, is the complete truth. But Machiavelli understood something that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. The most dangerous enemy is not the one standing in front of you, but the one hiding within you, wearing your own face. Your sexual shadow isn't just some abstract psychological concept. It's the most powerful force shaping every relationship you've ever had, every person you've ever desired, and every way you've ever been hurt or disappointed in love. You see, Machiavelli wrote about the necessity of understanding human nature in its rawest form, not as we wish it to be, but as it actually is. He knew that people are driven by primal forces they rarely acknowledge, let alone understand. And nowhere is this more evident than in the realm of sexuality and intimate relationships. The person you think you are sexually, the one with the noble intentions, the pure love, the straightforward desires, that's just the mask. Beneath it lies your sexual shadow, filled with the hungers, the needs, the patterns, and the wounds that actually govern your choices. Think about the last person who broke your heart. Think about how they seemed to know exactly which buttons to push, exactly how to make you feel alive and desperate at the same time. Do you really believe that was coincidence? Machiavelli would tell you that unconsciously you were drawn to them because they perfectly matched the dark blueprint of your sexual shadow, the template carved by your earliest wounds, your deepest fears, and your most forbidden desires. You didn't choose them despite the pain they would cause you. You chose them because of it. Your sexual shadow contains everything your conscious mind has rejected about desire. It holds the parts of yourself that your family, your culture, your religion taught you were unacceptable. It contains the raw hunger for power, for submission, for chaos, for safety, for destruction, for creation. All the forces that civilization tells us to suppress. But here's what Machiavelli understood that most people never learn. What you suppress doesn't disappear. It goes underground. It becomes more powerful, and it begins to control you from the shadows. Every relationship pattern you can't seem to break is your sexual shadow in action. Every time you find yourself attracted to someone who's emotionally unavailable, that's your shadow-seeking familiar pain. Every time you sabotage something good because it feels too safe, too healthy, too real, that's your shadow protecting you from the vulnerability it cannot tolerate. Every time you find yourself jealous, possessive, or desperate in ways that surprise even you, that's your shadow expressing needs your conscious mind refuses to acknowledge. But the cruelest trick your sexual shadow plays is this. It convinces you that you're the victim of these patterns. It makes you believe that you just keep meeting the wrong people, that you're unlucky in love, that if only you could find someone different, someone better, someone who really understands you, then everything would change. This is the most sophisticated self-deception, because it keeps you from seeing the truth Machiavelli would have recognized immediately. You are not the victim of your patterns. You are their architect. Your sexual shadow was formed in your earliest experiences of power and vulnerability. Maybe it was the parent who was there one day and gone the next, teaching you that love means abandonment. Maybe it was the caregiver who showered you with attention when you were perfect and withdrew when you showed your true self, teaching you that desire requires performance. Maybe it was the authority figure who crossed boundaries you didn't even know you had, teaching you that intimacy and violation are the same thing. Whatever the original wound, your sexual shadow has spent your entire life trying to recreate those dynamics, because familiarity feels like home, even when home was a place of pain. This is why you keep finding yourself in the same relationship over and over again, just with different faces. This is why the people who are genuinely good for you feel boring, wrong, or impossible to connect with. This is why your deepest attractions often feel like compulsions, like you have no choice in the matter. Your sexual shadow is running a program designed to seek out the exact conditions that will reactivate your original wounds, because somewhere deep inside, you believe that if you can just get it right this time, if you can just love them enough, if you can just be perfect enough, then maybe you can heal what was broken so long ago. But Machiavelli would tell you that this is a fool's game. You cannot heal your past by recreating it. You cannot solve your childhood by finding someone who represents your parents and trying to earn their love. You cannot overcome your deepest fears by repeatedly putting yourself in situations that trigger them. This approach doesn't lead to healing. It leads to compulsion. It leads to a life where you're always reaching for something that feels just out of reach, always trying to earn something that was never yours to earn. The shadow doesn't just affect who you're attracted to, it affects how you behave in relationships. If your shadow carries shame about your desires, you'll find yourself either completely shutting down sexually or performing sexuality in ways that feel disconnected from your authentic self. If your shadow carries fear of abandonment, you'll find yourself clinging so tightly to partners that you suffocate the very connection you're trying to preserve. If your shadow carries rage about past betrayals, you'll find yourself punishing current partners for crimes they didn't commit. And here's where it gets really insidious. Your sexual shadow will convince you that these behaviors are justified. It will tell you that your jealousy is just intuition, that your control is just care, that your emotional unavailability is just independence. It will make you feel like the reasonable one, the one who's just protecting yourself, the one who's learned from past mistakes. But what you're actually doing is ensuring that your past keeps repeating itself, that your wounds stay fresh, that your patterns stay intact. The most dangerous aspect of the sexual shadow is how it masquerades as preference. You'll tell yourself you have a type, that you just happen to be drawn to a certain kind of person. But what you're actually drawn to is a certain kind of dynamic, a certain familiar pain, a certain way of feeling about yourself. The person is interchangeable. The pattern is what matters. This is why you can meet someone who looks completely different from your usual type, but find yourself falling into the exact same relationship dynamics. The shadow doesn't care about surface details. It cares about recreating the emotional landscape it knows. Machiavelli understood that self-knowledge is the ultimate power, but he also understood that most people will do anything to avoid real self-knowledge because it's too threatening to their self-image. It's easier to blame your ex-partners, to blame bad timing, to blame circumstances beyond your control than it is to look at the consistent thread running through all your relationship experiences. You. Not you as the victim, but you as the unconscious creator of your own patterns. But here's what happens when you begin to see your sexual shadow clearly. You start to understand that every person you've been drawn to has been a mirror, reflecting back parts of yourself you couldn't see directly. The emotionally unavailable partner mirrors your own fear of true intimacy. The controlling partner mirrors your own need to control outcomes. The partner who can't commit mirrors your own terror of being truly known. They weren't doing something to you. They were showing you what you were doing to yourself. This realization is both devastating and liberating. Devastating because it means you can no longer maintain the comfortable fiction that you're just unlucky, that if you could just find the right person, everything would be different. But liberating because it means you have power. If you created these patterns, you can uncreate them. If you've been unconsciously seeking out certain dynamics, you can become conscious of that seeking and choose differently. The process of integrating your sexual shadow isn't about suppressing or eliminating these parts of yourself. Machiavelli would tell you that's impossible and counterproductive. These energies exist for a reason. The hunger for power, the need for surrender, the desire for intensity, the craving for safety. These aren't inherently destructive forces. They become destructive when they're unconscious, when they're driven by old wounds rather than present choices. Integration means learning to consciously work with these energies instead of being unconsciously controlled by them. It means recognizing when your attraction to someone is being driven by familiar pain rather than genuine compatibility. It means understanding that the butterflies in your stomach might not be excitement about new love, but anxiety about old patterns activating. It means developing the ability to feel the pull of your shadow without automatically following it. This is perhaps the most radical thing you can do. Learn to feel your deepest attractions without automatically acting on them. Learn to recognize the difference between desire that comes from wholeness and desire that comes from woundedness. Learn to identify when you're being drawn to someone because they represent growth, and when you're being drawn to them because they represent familiar dysfunction. Your sexual shadow will resist this consciousness with everything it has. It will tell you that you're overthinking, that you're being too analytical, that you're missing out on passion and spontaneity. It will convince you that the person you're drawn to is different this time, special, the exception to all your patterns. It will make you feel like you're betraying your authentic self by questioning your attractions. But this is exactly when you need to question them most. Real passion, real desire, real love doesn't need to bypass your consciousness. It doesn't need to override your wisdom or trigger your wounds to be valid. In fact, The most profound connections happen when you can be fully present with someone without your sexual shadow running the show, without old wounds determining your choices, without unconscious patterns dictating your behavior. When you begin to see your sexual shadow clearly, you also begin to see other people's shadows clearly. You start to recognize when someone is drawn to you not for who you actually are, but for how you fit into their unconscious patterns. You start to understand that someone's intense pursuit of you might have nothing to do with your inherent worth and everything to do with how you trigger their particular wounds. This isn't cynical, it's realistic. And this realism is what allows you to make choices based on what's actually happening, rather than what you wish were happening. The goal isn't to eliminate your sexual shadow, but to develop a conscious relationship with it, to understand its language, its needs, its fears, to recognize when it's trying to protect you and when it's trying to sabotage you, to learn to work with its energy rather than being worked by it. This is what Machiavelli would call true power. Not the power to control others, but the power to understand and direct the forces within yourself. This consciousness changes everything about how you approach relationships. Instead of waiting for someone to complete you, you become complete enough to choose partnership from overflow rather than need. Instead of seeking someone to heal your wounds, you do the work of healing them yourself. Instead of looking for someone to make you feel worthy, you develop an unshakable sense of your own worth that doesn't depend on external validation. And paradoxically, this is when you become truly attractive. Not attractive in the way that triggers other people's shadows, but attractive in the way that draws people who are also doing their own work, who are also committed to consciousness, who are also choosing love from wholeness rather than woundedness. This is how you break the cycle. This is how you stop repeating the same relationship over and over again. This is how you find love that doesn't require you to abandon yourself. Your sexual shadow isn't your enemy. It's the guardian of your deepest wounds and your greatest potential. It contains not just your capacity for destruction, but your capacity for creation. Not just your hunger for control, but your ability to surrender. Not just your fear of intimacy, but your longing for true connection. The same forces that have driven your most destructive patterns contain the energy for your most profound healing. But first, you must see them clearly. You must be willing to look at yourself with the same unflinching honesty that Machiavelli brought to his analysis of human nature. You must be willing to see that you are not the victim of your relationship patterns, but their creator. And you must be willing to take responsibility not just for your conscious choices, but for your unconscious ones as well. This is the path to sexual and relational freedom, not through denial or suppression of your shadow, but through conscious integration of all parts of yourself. Not through finding someone who will love your light while ignoring your darkness, but through becoming someone who can love their own complexity and therefore recognize and appreciate complexity in others. Not through avoiding the parts of yourself that feel dangerous or unacceptable, but through learning to work with them consciously and skillfully. Your sexual shadow has been running your love life long enough. It's time to take back the reins. It's time to choose your desires instead of being chosen by them. It's time to create relationships that serve your growth rather than your wounds. It's time to discover what love looks like when it's not being filtered through old pain. But let's be even more specific about how this shadow operates in your daily life, because Machiavelli would insist on practical application of this knowledge. Your sexual shadow doesn't just influence who you sleep with, it influences how you flirt, how you present yourself, how you interpret signals from others, and how you navigate the entire landscape of attraction and desire. Every time you catch yourself changing your personality around someone you find attractive, that's your shadow adjusting its mask to trigger their particular wounds or to avoid triggering your own. Notice how you become a different version of yourself around different people you're attracted to. With the unavailable ones, you become the pursuer, the one who's always available, always understanding, always willing to accept crumbs. With the ones who pursue you intensely, you become distant, critical, hard to please. With the safe ones, you become bored, restless, convinced something is missing. These aren't conscious choices. These are your shadow's automatic responses, designed to maintain the familiar dynamics that feel like love to your wounded parts. Your sexual shadow also determines what you find threatening in relationships. If your shadow carries shame about your own desires, you'll be triggered by partners who are comfortable with their sexuality. If your shadow carries fear of abandonment, you'll be threatened by your partner's independence. If your shadow carries rage about past betrayals, you'll be suspicious of your partner's friendships, their past relationships, their moments of emotional distance. What threatens you most in others is often what you've disowned in yourself. And here's something Machiavelli would find particularly fascinating. Your sexual shadow doesn't just attract certain types of people, it repels others. The people who could actually love you in healthy ways often feel your shadow's resistance and back away, not because they don't care about you, but because they can sense that you're not available for the kind of love they're offering. Your shadow creates an energetic field around you that says, "I'm only available for familiar pain, familiar patterns, familiar wounds." Healthy people feel this and respectfully withdraw, while wounded people feel it and move closer. This is why working on your shadow isn't just about understanding your attractions. It's about becoming available for different kinds of connections entirely. It's about learning to recognize when someone is offering you genuine care and not automatically pushing it away because it doesn't feel familiar. It's about developing the capacity to receive love that doesn't hurt, attention that doesn't come with conditions, and desire that doesn't require you to abandon parts of yourself. The sexual shadow also operates through your fantasies, your porn preferences, your masturbation habits, and your secret desires. These aren't just random preferences. They're maps of your unconscious, showing you exactly where your wounds intersect with your sexuality. The scenarios that most turn you on often contain themes of power, submission, danger, rescue, taboo, or reunion that directly relate to your earliest experiences of love and pain. Your shadow uses sexual fantasy to process unresolved emotional material, which is why your sexual fantasies often involve scenarios you would never want to experience in real life. Understanding this doesn't mean you need to feel ashamed of your fantasies or try to change them. It means recognizing them as information about your inner world, rather than instructions for your outer world. Your shadow speaks through your sexuality, and learning its language helps you understand what it's trying to heal, what it's trying to express, and what it's trying to resolve. But here's where it gets even more complex. Your sexual shadow also influences how you interpret other people's behavior. If your shadow expects betrayal, you'll read betrayal into innocent actions. If your shadow expects rejection, you'll interpret neutral responses as personal attacks. If your shadow expects to be used, you'll assume that anyone who desires you must have ulterior motives. Your shadow doesn't just shape what you do, it shapes what you see, what you believe is happening, and what you think other people's intentions are. This is why two people can have completely different experiences of the same relationship. Your shadow is constantly filtering information, highlighting evidence that confirms its beliefs about love, relationships, and your worth, while minimizing or dismissing evidence that contradicts those beliefs. If your shadow believes you're unlovable, it will notice every moment your partner seems distant and ignore every moment they show care. If your shadow believes love always leads to abandonment, it will interpret your partner's need for space as the beginning of the end. Machiavelli understood that perception shapes reality more than facts do, and nowhere is this more true than in intimate relationships. Your sexual shadow creates the lens through which you see every relationship experience, and that lens determines not just what you notice, but how you respond to what you notice. This is how your shadow becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, creating the very experiences it expects to have. The process of shadow integration in sexuality requires developing what we might call erotic consciousness, the ability to be present with your sexual and romantic experiences without being controlled by unconscious patterns. This means learning to feel attraction without immediately acting on it, to notice your automatic responses without being driven by them, to recognize when your wounds are being triggered without letting them dictate your choices. Erotic consciousness also means developing the capacity to be genuinely intimate, which your shadow will resist with everything it has. True intimacy requires letting someone see you completely, not just the parts of yourself that you think are lovable. It requires being present with someone else's full humanity, not just the parts that trigger your familiar patterns. It requires staying connected during conflict, during vulnerability, during the moments when your shadow wants to run, hide, attack, or shut down. Your sexual shadow learned its patterns in relationships where intimacy was conditional, where love was earned through performance, where acceptance required hiding parts of yourself. So when you encounter someone who wants to love all of you, who doesn't need you to be perfect, who can stay present with your difficult emotions, your shadow doesn't know how to respond. It will try to create familiar dynamics, to test whether this person will really stay, to prove that this love, like all the others, is temporary and conditional. This is why the healthiest relationships often feel the most challenging to your shadow. They don't provide the familiar highs and lows, the constant drama, the sense of having to earn love through suffering or perfect behavior. They feel stable, which your shadow interprets as boring. They feel safe, which your shadow interprets as a trap. They feel real, which your shadow finds terrifying because it means you can't hide behind the masks and defenses that have protected you for so long. But Machiavelli would tell you that this discomfort is precisely the signal that you're moving in the right direction. Growth always feels uncomfortable to the parts of you that are invested in staying the same. Your shadow's resistance to healthy love isn't evidence that something is wrong. It's evidence that something is finally right, finally challenging the old patterns that have kept you stuck. Learning to work consciously with your sexual shadow also means developing boundaries based on your actual values rather than your wounds. Most people's boundaries are either too rigid, designed to keep out anything that might trigger their shadow, or too permeable, allowing their shadow's needs to override their conscious choices. Conscious boundaries are flexible but firm, protective but not defensive, clear but not controlling. When you understand your sexual shadow, you can recognize the difference between someone who's genuinely not right for you and someone who just doesn't trigger your familiar patterns. You can distinguish between red flags that signal genuine incompatibility and red flags that are just your shadow's fear of something different. You can tell the difference between attraction based on potential for growth and attraction based on potential for familiar pain. This consciousness transforms not just who you choose but how you love. Instead of loving from neediness, you love from fullness. Instead of loving to heal your wounds, you love to express your joy. Instead of loving to prove your worth, you love because you already know your worth. Instead of loving to avoid loneliness, you love to share your completeness. This shift changes everything about the quality of connection you're able to create and attract. Your sexual shadow contains not just your capacity for destruction, but your capacity for ecstasy. Not just your hunger for control, but your ability to surrender completely. Not just your fear of intimacy, but your longing for union with another soul. The same intensity that has driven your most painful patterns contains the energy for your most transcendent experiences of love and connection. But accessing this transcendence requires facing the shadow first, understanding its patterns, learning its language, and consciously choosing to work with its energy rather than being worked by it. This is the path Machiavelli would recognize as true power. Not the power to manipulate or control others, but the power to understand and direct the forces within yourself. Your sexual shadow is waiting for you to finally see it clearly, to finally understand what it's been trying to tell you all along, and to finally transform its energy from compulsion into conscious creation. This is your invitation to step into the full power of conscious choice in love, to discover what desire looks like when it comes from wholeness rather than woundedness, and to experience what happens when you love from your authentic self rather than your defended self.